5 days after the Confederacy surrendered, America thought the war was over and peace had finally arrived. On the night of April 14, 1865, which was a Good Friday, President Abraham Lincoln sat inside Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., unaware that history was about to turn violent. A Southern sympathizer and a popular actor, John Wilkes Booth, raised a gun and fired a single shot into the president's head. Lincoln would cling to life through the night before dying the next morning, April 15, 1865, becoming the first U.S. president ever assassinated and changing the nation forever. This is the full story of the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. By the spring of 1865, the United States was exhausted. The Civil War had lasted 4 brutal years and claimed the lives of more than 600,000 soldiers. Cities lay in ruins, families were torn apart, and the nation was deeply divided along political, racial, and regional lines. Just days before Abraham Lincoln was shot, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending the war. For the North, it was a moment of relief and victory. For the South, it was a moment of defeat, anger, and uncertainty. President Lincoln was already thinking beyond the battlefield. His focus had shifted to Reconstruction, how to bring the Southern states back into the Union, and how to heal a country broken by war. Lincoln believed in a gentle approach. He spoke of malice toward none and called for reconciliation rather than revenge. At the same time, the nation faced a new reality. Slavery was ending. The 13th Amendment had been approved by Congress, and millions of formerly enslaved people were stepping into freedom, even as many white Southerners resisted that change. This tense moment created deep resentment among Lincoln's enemies. Some blamed him for the South's collapse. Others saw him as a tyrant who had destroyed their way of life. Among them was John Wilkes Booth, a popular actor who believed killing Lincoln would strike a blow against the Union and revive the Confederate cause. As celebrations of victory filled northern cities, a deadly plot was already forming, one that would turn America's moment of triumph into one of its darkest hours. Before John Wilkes Booth decided to kill Abraham Lincoln, his original plan was far less deadly, but still dangerous. In late 1864 and early 1865, Booth became obsessed with the idea of kidnapping the president. He believed that capturing Lincoln and holding him hostage could force the Union government to release Confederate prisoners of war. To Booth, this was a way to strike back at the North and help revive the failing Confederate cause. Booth did not act alone. He gathered a small group of co-conspirators, most of them young men who shared his anger toward Lincoln and the Union. They met secretly in boarding houses and taverns in Washington, D.C., planning routes, hiding places, and escape paths. Booth closely followed Lincoln's movements, learning when and where the president traveled with minimal security. At the time, presidential protection was loose by modern standards, making the plot seem possible. The kidnapping plan nearly went into action in March 1865. Booth believed Lincoln would attend a play or travel outside the city, giving them a chance to seize him. But Lincoln changed his schedule at the last moment, and the opportunity disappeared. The failed attempt frustrated Booth deeply. As Confederate defeat became inevitable and slavery moved closer to abolition, Booth's anger hardened. The kidnapping plot collapsed, and in its place, a far more violent plan began to take shape, one that would shock the nation and alter American history forever. After his plan to kidnap President Lincoln collapsed, John Wilkes Booth knew time was running out. The Confederate capital, Richmond, had fallen, the South was defeated, and slavery was coming to an end. To Booth, kidnapping no longer felt powerful enough. He wanted something louder, something final. So he turned to Plan B, assassination. Booth believed that killing Lincoln and removing other top leaders at the same time would throw the federal government into chaos and give the Confederate cause one last dramatic strike. By chance, Booth learned that President Lincoln and his wife would attend a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theatre on the night of April 14, 1865. The opportunity was perfect. Booth arranged for his accomplices to strike simultaneously. One was assigned to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, another to assassinate Secretary of State William Seward, who was already recovering from injuries at home. If all went according to plan, the Union government would be decapitated in a single night. Booth then prepared to play his final role. That evening, the Lincolns arrived at the theatre with Major Henry Rathbone, a young army officer, and Clara Harris, his fiancée. They sat in a private box overlooking the stage. Around 10:15 p.m., as the audience laughed at a loud line in the play, Booth quietly slipped into the box. He raised a pistol and fired a single shot into the back of the president's head. Rathbone immediately lunged at the attacker, but Booth stabbed him in the shoulder and leapt from the balcony onto the stage below. As he fled, Booth shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis!" Thus ever to tyrants, the motto of Virginia. At first, many in the crowd thought it was part of the play. Then Mary Lincoln screamed, and the truth became clear. Booth escaped the theatre and vanished into the night on a waiting horse. Whether he broke his leg jumping to the stage or later during his escape is still debated, but the injury slowed him down. Meanwhile, his larger plot was falling apart. The attempt on Secretary Seward failed, and the plan to kill Vice President Johnson was never carried out. Booth's face, however, was instantly recognizable. He was a famous actor, and word spread quickly. Union soldiers launched a massive manhunt across Maryland and Virginia. Booth fled with fellow conspirator David Herold, eventually stopping at the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd, who treated Booth's injured leg. Mudd would later be arrested and sentenced to life in prison for helping the assassin, though his sentence was eventually reduced. For nearly 2 weeks, Booth stayed on the run, hiding, moving, and growing more desperate as Union troops closed in. On April 26, 1865, soldiers tracked Booth and Herold to a tobacco barn in Virginia. Surrounded and outnumbered, Herold surrendered. Booth refused. The troops set the barn on fire to force him out. As flames rose, a Union sergeant shot Booth in the neck. He was carried outside, still alive but fading. In his final moments, Booth asked to see his hands. Looking at them, he whispered his last words, "Useless, useless." With Booth's death, the hunt ended, but the damage was already done. Abraham Lincoln was gone, the nation was leaderless at a fragile moment, and America's path forward would never be the same. Moments after the gunshot rang out, confusion filled Ford's Theatre. Then a young army doctor in the audience, Charles Leal, rushed into the president's box. One look told him the truth. Lincoln's wound was severe. Soldiers gently lifted the unconscious president and carried him across the street to a small boarding house, the Peterson House. There they laid him on a narrow bed that could barely hold his tall frame. As doctors examined him, the Surgeon General arrived and delivered the grim verdict. Abraham Lincoln could not be saved. It was only a matter of time. Through the long night, the room stayed crowded and silent. Members of Lincoln's cabinet stood nearby. Vice President Andrew Johnson waited, knowing the weight of the nation was about to fall on his shoulders. In the next room, Mary Todd Lincoln, shattered by grief, cried uncontrollably, comforted by her eldest son, Robert Lincoln. At 7:22 a.m. on Saturday, April the 15th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was pronounced dead. He was 56 years old. The president who preserved the Union and helped end slavery was gone, killed just days after the Civil War had ended. News spread rapidly across the country, and a nation already scarred by war was plunged into deep mourning. Lincoln's body was escorted back to the White House under heavy guard. On April 18th, it was taken to the Capitol Rotunda, where it lay in state for 3 days. Tens of thousands filed past to pay their final respects. Afterward, a funeral train carried Lincoln's remains on a long journey back to Springfield, Illinois. Along the tracks, crowds gathered and watched the train pass. On May 4, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was laid to rest at Oak Ridge Cemetery, buried alongside his young son, William Lincoln. The journey was over, but the questions remained. Why did John Wilkes Booth hate Lincoln so deeply? What drove him to pull the trigger at the moment of victory? We will tell that full story in the next episode.